Good morning, everyone. I will call to order the meeting of the Legislative Committee for today, January 12th. I want to welcome Dr. Burke to this committee. I think he's been on this committee formerly. He'll now be a permanent member. Good morning, Dr. Burke. We have on remote locations Supervisor Rutherford. Good morning, Supervisor. And we have Council Member Buscaino also at remote location. Good morning, Council Member Buscaino.
Morning.
We expect Supervisor Nelson to join us also. He's not here yet, but he's expected to join us. And I'm wondering about Dr. Parker. Is he in your location, Dr. Burke? Is he expected to come? He's not there.
He's on it.
He's on his way. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we will start this morning with the federal update, as we usually do. And I will ask our federal advocates to give us any updates from the written reports that we have on file here. And first we have from Carmen Group, Gary Hoitzman. Good morning, Gary. Happy New Year to you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and Happy New Year to you and to the committee. Appreciate that. Just a couple of quick updates from my written report, which focuses on the executive branch side of things here in Washington. Just a couple of quick notes from the Environmental Protection Agency, and then a few notes I've got on to talk about infrastructure. Review the bidding on the Clean Power Plan. The EPA in October announced that it was basically repealing the Obama-era Clean Power Plan that had strict regulations of stationary power plants. Here in December, just a few weeks ago, they announced they were going to take public comment on what the agency should do now that the Clean Power Plan is being repealed, what they should do in a regulatory way going forward. And so they announced there'd be a comment period. And here a couple days ago, in January, they announced they were extending the comment period to April 26th. And they were going to have 3 new listening sessions, public hearings, if you will, to take public oral comments on the Clean Power Plan and what should be done as in the next steps. And those 3 public hearings will be in Kansas City, Missouri in February, in Gillette, Wyoming in March, and then in San Francisco, California on February 28th. So mark your calendar for that. Also, the EPA is, been announcing some of its accomplishments for the year and what they're boasting about. One of the things is that they're reducing the EPA workforce significantly, and they claim they're down to 14,000 employees now, down from, I think, over 15,000 a year ago. And through buyouts and attrition and other things, the EPA says it can reduce that by 25% or more over the next 4 or 5 years. So that's sort of the trajectory that the EPA is on in its personnel matters there at the EPA. One quick new appointment at the EPA of note, the President announced that Holly Greaves of Washington, D.C. would be the new Chief Financial Officer of the EPA. She has a background in accounting and auditing and had done similar work for other federal agencies. Now, turning now to the policy matter of keen interest to us as we follow the funding matters in Washington of interest on the clean air side. We're looking at the infrastructure proposal expected to come out of the administration. The word on the street is the administration will come out with a more detailed proposal here sometime around the time of the State of the Union address on January 30th, maybe closer to when they release the budget in early February, outlining exactly what they're going to be doing with this. And I think there is still a lot of uncertainty of how it's going to be paid for. There's been mixed signals just in the last week or so in terms of the background of whether the how much funding, actual federal funding, is going to be involved in it. They're saying initially $200 billion in direct federal funding, but the compromise with Democrats is going to have to increase that number significantly. You saw here on the news this week a scene where the president's sitting at a table with these Republicans and Democrats trying to hammer out a compromise on some issues here related to the budget and immigration. Well, I think you can expect the same kind of thing to happen when infrastructure comes to the fore, probably more closer in February. There's going to have to be a lot of back and forth between the president and the Democrats and the Republicans to try to hammer out some kind of agreements on how to go forward with infrastructure. I had a chance this week. I wanted to report. I talked to Senator Inhofe of the Environment Public Works Committee on the Senate side. He said that he had spoken recently to the president. He had also spoken very extensively with Congressman Bill Schuster of the House Transportation Committee, who, as you may have seen, just announced his retirement at the end of his term, hoping to devote a good part of his year this year to trying to get the president's infrastructure bill passed. And Inhofe seemed to be very optimistic that the proposal that they will end up with will be very heavy on the spending side. And he kind of indicated that some of the more conservative fiscal hawks on the Republican side would kind of be sacrificed more to going with a more robust spending initiative here, is the way he sees it. And he mentioned that he expected there to be what he called broad project eligibilities. Now, we've talked about a possible set-aside for clean air funding. He didn't see that specifically, but he said there would be very broad eligibilities for projects that have strong local and state support. And he indicated that part of this initiative would be to try to get around the state stranglehold on federal transportation funds in particular, and make it so that local entities, local government agencies, MPOs, and others would have a much greater say in the kind of projects that were ultimately funded. So I thought that was an interesting twist on it. So we'll be watching this very closely, but we expect there will be some news coming out of the administration here around the State of the Union address here at the end of this month. So that's my quick report today. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I want to welcome Dr. Parker. He has joined us, so good morning, Dr. Parker. And
Good morning, Madam Chair. I have a question for Gary. Gary, in talking to Inhofe, because when we had talked before, as you recall, it stated he was waiting for the infrastructure process to start. Has there been any discussions at all relative to the proposal that we had left with the staff?
Well, he indicated that it would come under this category of there being broad eligibilities for things that local entities want to do, and he didn't expect that the bill would be a laundry list. In other words, it's not going to be a whole series of earmarks of specific projects. It's going to be more permissive in that the agencies and local entities will come to the government with their proposals, and there's going to be a bias towards funding things that make sense. That's the way he was putting it. So I think he's still encouraged that that kind of a project that you initiated with him is something that can be funded under the infrastructure bill as he sees it.
When do you see us basically being able to re-engage with him relative to any specifics to get this reignited again?
Well, we're happy. I'm sure he'd be happy to meet with us whenever it's convenient. I think right now you're looking at waiting. I think until the president makes his announcement and puts out his initiative. I think after that, maybe in February, March timeframe would be a good time to reconnect there on that. That would be my proposal for that.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll be talking about it as we go on.
Great.
Thank you. Any other questions for Gary from our committee members, staff? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Gary, for that update. There's some very important information for us as we begin the new year, and we'll look forward to working with you and keeping on top of what's happening in this administration. Next we have Caleb Froelich, I believe, is with us from Cassidy and Associates. Good morning, Caleb, and Happy New Year to you.
Good morning. Thank you. In addition to our written report, we just have a few updates we wanted to walk through with you. First is that, of note, Congressman Steve Womack, Republican from Arkansas, will be the new House Budget Committee chairman. So this will be important as both chambers work to finalize the budget cap deal to allow an omnibus appropriations deal. Currently, the government is funded on a continuing resolution that will expire on January 19th. It's our understanding that they will not be able to reach a budget cap deal before the 19th, so there will be another CR, likely until President's Day weekend, middle of February timeframe, at which time the hope would be for a longer-term omnibus appropriations package to pass. We previously mentioned that DERA passed the Senate. So one of our pushes in the House of Representatives this year will be to push for the House of Representatives to also pass the DERA reauthorization bill. There are a number of South Coast congressional representatives on the committees of jurisdiction, so we will be working with the South Coast staff and team to push those representatives on DERA legislation. In our written report, we briefly mentioned Senator Murkowski's comprehensive energy legislation. Just a quick update on that is that Senator Murkowski, has recently been in the press expressing her desire for early action on this comprehensive energy legislation. She is saying Q1 or early Q2 for that. That's a particular note for South Coast because of the Vehicle Innovation Act, which provides vehicle technology funding of $250 million a year to the Department of Energy. I will also now recognize my colleague Charles Brittingham to provide a quick infrastructure and transportation update.
So to give you an update on infrastructure, EPW held a water resources hearing Wednesday. In my personal opinion, having been an author of the last two WRDA bills, it was quite the snoozer. A lot of it was just, regurgitated stuff that was, stuff that people are currently understand about the state of our infrastructure. There was no Corps representative sitting on the panels. EPW will be having a hearing next Wednesday where General Semonite will be on panel one and the only panel. House T&I is having a hearing next Thursday where they will have General Ed Jackson as well as James Dalton and a series of stakeholders sitting on the panel. It's a subcommittee hearing, the Subcommittee on Water Resources with Chairman Graves. They will talk about efficiencies and project delivery. That'll happen next Thursday. And some early indications on the Trump infrastructure plan. I will agree with Gary. It was projected to be before the State of the Union. Right now, it doesn't look like State of the Union or before State of the Union. My bet would be probably the week of the budget release, which is scheduled currently as of yesterday morning for still the first Tuesday of February. My guess is they would release the infrastructure plan during that same week to get caught kind of in that media circus. I do know there are some things in the infrastructure plan of particular for you guys is the elimination of redundancy in EPA reviews for environmental impacts under Section 309 of the Clean Air Act. So currently EPA goes through a series of reviews and they include one more additional review. There is appetite to remove that sort of redundancy in the environmental reforms piece of the infrastructure package. There also includes things like an incentive program for DOT, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and EPA, a transformative program, rural infrastructure, again, a big piece on NEPA reform, and series of cats and dogs that exist inside the Trump infrastructure plan. Now, what you're most likely going to see is a 60 to 70-page document of principles. I might have discussed that last time. It will not be legislative language. However, I do know legislative language exists. My impression is that this infrastructure plan will be sent up to Congress, and it'll be Congress's responsibility to put language together for an infrastructure plan. So basically, the onus is going to be on Congress, who will probably reach back to the administration for the language that I know, for at least for some cases, that's already currently drafted. Guys, and this is a personal opinion here, I wouldn't put too much stock on, and this is politically speaking, on an infrastructure plan passing in 2018. As we all know, it's an election year. Early indication is that folks are going to try to run on tax reform. There will be progress and movement on an infrastructure package, or at least a Water Resources and Development Act. Lame duck action is probably my best case. A lot of it has to do with timing. The committees, respective committees in the House and Senate need to get out at a certain time, or they're going to slip for floor time. Again, I wouldn't look for anything as far as like a final congressional action to occur before the lame duck.
Okay.
Thank you. That concludes our remarks.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Cassidy and Associates on their report? Okay, thank you. There are no questions here, and so we'll move on to Kadish and Associates. And Mark Kadish, I believe, is on the line with us. Good morning, Mark, and Happy New Year.
Correct. Good morning. Happy New Year, Madam Chair and everyone. I'll have a very brief update. But before I do that, I just want to draw attention. Obviously, in the report we mentioned this, but just to underscore, one of the things that Congress did do, perhaps the only major thing, was the tax bill in December. And as I think your staff followed closely, there was some concern that they might that the House was trying to eliminate the electric vehicle tax credit, but the Senate ultimately prevailed on that, and the tax credit remained in place. So that's good news. One immediate thing that obviously we're all keeping our eye on is that the government runs out of funding on January 20th. The CR extends through the 19th. We fully expect that there will be another continuing resolution to keep the government open past then. As I think people who are following the news know already, one of the big holdups on that, in addition to budget caps and what will be the top-line numbers to spend, is the DACA program. And depending on whether that gets resolved or not, we may have a very short-term continuing resolution extension, or it may go into the end of February. That's yet to be determined. I think probably many of you saw the President's remarks on the proposed compromise yesterday that Durbin and Senator Durbin and Senator Graham proposed to the President. That was rejected. The last thing I'd probably just add as an update since our report is I think the staff now knows, but Senator Harris, who is a member of the Environment and Public Works Committee, has decided to leave that committee and accept a position on the Senate Judiciary Committee. So that leaves us without a Californian on the Environment and Public Works Committee. And so we'll have to continue to work hard through our senators on infrastructure and other EPW-related matters, but we will no longer have a member serving on the committee. So that think wraps up my report or updates, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for that update, and we'll be looking forward to more work on this as the year progresses. So thank you for all you're doing in Washington, D.C. for South Coast District. We'll move now to state legislation, and we have a report from Gonzalez and Sons, and if you would give us any update on what's happening up there since you filed your report. I know the budget came out Wednesday, I believe. There may be some further information on that, but we look forward to hearing your update. Is it Paul? Paul's on the phone.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and Happy New Year to everyone.
Okay.
As you know, the legislature reconvened on Wednesday, January 3rd, with a few changes in their membership. As you know, the legislature, like many other industries, is dealing with sexual harassment allegations, which has led to the resignation of Assembly members Raul Bocanegra and Assemblymember Matthew DeBobney. On January 3rd, the first day back, the Senate Republicans were going to put up a vote to expel Senator Tony Mendoza, who has refused to step down from his position. And the Democrats reacted with about a 4-hour caucus, which made it for a very long day, first day back to session. However, after that 4-hour caucus, Senator Mendoza came onto the Senate floor and announced that he'll be taking a leave of absence for the month of January while the investigation is completed, and he plans on returning in February to resume his business again. So, meanwhile, Assemblymember Jimmy Gomez was elected to the 34th Congressional District, and his replacement, Assemblymember Wendy Carrillo, was sworn in on December 18th. The Assembly now has 52 Democrats, 2 short of the 54 needed for the supermajority, and the Senate has 26 Democrats, 1 short of the 2/3 supermajority. As the chair had mentioned, on Wednesday, Governor Brown released his state budget. The proposal is a $190 billion budget with a general fund surplus of over $19 billion. In presenting the budget, the governor urged caution despite the abundance of surplus revenue. I think the larger question, especially in the state's mind, the governor's mind, is how will the new federal tax laws affect the California budget? This will remain to be seen, but the legislature is already responding to one of the new provisions in hopes of getting around the $10,000 deduction caps for state and local income and property taxes. Senate President Pro Tem De Leon is working on legislation called the Protect California Taxpayers Act, which would allow Californians who itemize their deductions to pay their state income taxes as if they are fully deductible charitable donations to the state. So the money would eventually end up in the state's budget, but first it would go into a special fund ran by the Treasurer's Office, and the state would credit taxpayers for their payments. So lots to be seen in the next 6 months as the negotiations continue between the governor and the legislature, and we will continue to work with the legislature and the governor's office to ensure that the SCAQMD's goals are reflected in the budget. I know Jacob plans on giving a little bit more detail in the budget, so I'll leave that to him. But lastly, I wanted to provide you with some of the upcoming important legislative deadlines. Today is the last day for policy committees to hear and report fiscal bills to fiscal committee. Those are the 2-year bills that are still remaining from last year. Next Friday, January 19th, is the last day to submit bill requests to the Office of Leg Counsel in order to have your bill drafted, and that coincides with the February 16th deadline to submit bills and put them across the desk. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Lots going on already up there. Any questions for Paul? None yet, so we're looking forward to a hot new year up there.
I have one question.
Yes, go ahead. Dr. Parker has a question. Dr. Parker, go ahead.
Specifically, were there any new allocations for environmental expenditures that we would be beneficiaries of in the new budget proposed by the governor?
Dr. Parker, I know Jacob Moss from one of the other firms was going to give an update on the GGRF. So, Jacob, if you want to take that on.
Sure. This is Jacob Moss. Good morning, Madam Chair and Dr. Parker.
Good morning, Jacob.
No details as of yet, other than in this announcement about the budget in general, the governor did say that they felt that cap and trade auction proceeds had stabilized, and in the 2018-19 year, there's about $1.25 billion available for appropriation. And when the governor gives his State of the State address, he plans to announce what his plan is for those funds. So we're staying very close to his office and leadership in both houses. They're very aware of what we would like to see, and that's going to be the large chunk of what it is that we're doing on behalf of South Coast this year, is making sure that that money is helpful for us, for our goals.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Parker.
I assume then that means that each cap and trade, I should say auction that we have, each time those funds themselves are subject to new disbursement procedures and rules and limits. It doesn't go from one to another like last time. What did we ended up getting? Maybe about 15-20% of the overall allocation?
Yeah, I think we ended up somewhere in the $350 million range last year, but it was a one-time appropriation. So we're hoping for a continuous appropriation. Obviously, everyone would like that, but that remains to be seen. So that's part of what we're going to be pushing for this year is not to have to redo this every year.
Dr. Parker, this is Paul Gonzalez. Just to add on to that, as you know, 60% of the funds go towards the pre-programmed cap and trade program, so the high-speed rail, transformative communities, and things like that. The remaining 40% is going to be left up to the legislature to figure out how they want to spend and appropriate those funds. So that's going to be what we'll be focusing on this year, is that remaining 40%.
So that 60% is written into the bill? Into the cap and trade formula?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Parker, I would just add that part of the challenge is in the governor releasing his budget, he left it purposely vague to actually do, negotiations, if you will, in terms of all those interests that Jacob and Paul have described. We know that housing is going to be a big issue. We know that the environment's going to be a big issue. Everyone has been sort of positioning themselves to try to get, at least for us, to try to get that 20% of the remaining overall funds that are available. So let me restate that. 50% of the remaining funds that are available, so that we would get a lion's share of that funding. 617, the idea behind it is that although it was a one-time fund, it's considered a down payment on ongoing work that's necessary. So at CAPCOA and at the districts and all of us, we're pushing to make sure that that's realized in terms of that one-time funding is nowhere near enough to do the things that have been asked for, both on a really a short-term as well as a long-term. So that's part of what Will and Paul and the others are working on, is making sure that we have access to that funding and that it's not just one time, but it's ongoing funding.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. And I'll continue now with the report from Jacob from California Advisors. Jacob, do you have more to add to update us on the report that you've given us on the state issues?
Yeah, just a couple quick dates. And I can't remember if Paul mentioned this, but the upcoming special elections for Assuming Devadne and Sebastian Ridley Thomas's seats, former seats, there's going to be a primary on April 3rd and then a special election on June 5th to fill those spots. And June 5th is also the date that Senator Newman's recall election will take place. And then on March 21st, it announced that Senator Atkins will be sworn in as the new pro tem. There's still a lot of rumor, but nothing confirmed about whether or not Senator Atkins being sworn in will cause a shuffling of policy committee chairmanships. It's likely. We've also heard that there's going to be a shuffling of chairs in the assembly, but nothing that is decided or official to report at this time.
What's the date for swearing in?
21st.
What is it?
March 21st.
March 21st. Okay.
March 21st.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from you on your report, Jacob? Do we have it completed?
No, I think that concludes my update. I appreciate the time.
Are there any questions for Jacob?
Madam Chair, I'm wondering, relative to the new things that went on concerning who is the new chairperson of Revenue and Taxation, what effect that's going to have relative to redistribution of some of these dollars.
Of the GGRF dollars?
Yes.
I'm sorry, it was a little garbled. Of GGRF? I think that the GGRF...
My question is that I think Assemblyman Sebastian Ridley Thomas basically has resigned. We have a new chair itself of how revenue and taxation itself should basically go about. Is that going to have a tremendous effect on the direction and the means by which these funds themselves are going to be distributed? That we might be able to...
I don't think so. I don't think so, but if Paul or anyone has a different opinion on that, feel free to correct me. But because generally the GGRF funding is managed through the budget and with leadership in both houses and the governor's office, the Rev and Tax Committee hasn't had a huge impact on those negotiations historically. Maybe some input, but I think this largely ends up being a leadership negotiation.
Well, Dr. Parker, this is Jason Gonzalez. I would only add to that the new chair is, I think, fairly obvious to the board, an ally of the district, but also a strong leader amongst the leadership, and will play a role with the subcommittees when they make their recommendations as part of the budget process. So I think it's a positive step for the district for obvious reasons.
Well, certainly we are really bouncing around trying to get as many dollars allocated for our causes as much as we could. And any advantage that we could have in doing that, I think we should be aware of it and make sure that our interests and needs and everything else is basically felt and as best as we can.
Dr. Parker, this is Jason Gonzalez again. Just a very quick story. When my grandfather was on the Rev and Tax Committee, he kept bringing a bill before the Rev and Tax Committee, and the consultant would give him a scathing analysis. Well, he later became the chair of the Rev and Tax Committee, and he met with the consultant and said, am I going to get the same analysis that I've been receiving on my property tax bill? And the consultant said, you're going to get an analysis that's reflective of the chair. So being the chair of the committee has a lot of sway.
Okay.
Good story.
Thank you very much.
Great story. Thank you, Jason. Mr. Gonzalez has been around Sacramento so long. There's many wonderful stories from that family. Thank you for sharing that. And Jacob has completed his report, and so the next report is from David Quintana, the Quintana Cruise Company. And David, could you please give us an update on your written report, if any?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. And good morning, everyone. And I got to tell you, it's tough batting last in this crew. I'm looking at a sheet of paper with nothing but crossed off items, man. So not a lot of guys left on base. But let me give you some insider stuff because I think that's really what I'm really the best at. On the March 21st date, I was lucky enough to be able to have an hour meeting with both the incoming pro tem and the pro tem on Tuesday. And that March 21st date is pretty interesting. It's no coincidence that the March 21st date falls right after the day in which the deadline for the ballot designation falls. So by Tony agreeing with Kevin to do March 21st, what that allows Kevin to do is that allows him to put on his U.S. Senate ballot designation President of the California Senate. So I know personally, DeLeon wanted to stay until June, and Tony was fighting hard. She wanted him to do it on February 1st. But they came up with this agreement which would allow Tony, and you're not going to read this anywhere, but they came up with this agreement so that Kevin could at least be able on his U.S. Senate ballot designation to put President of the California Senate. So that's just a little insight on that. On the chair of the new committee, the incoming chair that's going to be taking Sebastian Ridley Thomas' place, I can say this: the chair is going to be Autumn Burke. And in all of my years working in the legislature, Autumn is one of the sharpest, most intelligent legislators I've ever worked with. And I think that if we have a good case and we can present that case well to Chairwoman Burke, we're going to have a good chance to get what we need, Mr. Parker. So I feel very confident with this new chair. Another issue that you might want to keep in mind is what exactly is Kevin DeLeon going to do at the end of the day. My inside sources tell me that on February 1st, Kevin DeLeon is going to show far less than $1 million in his run against Dianne Feinstein. Dianne, I talked to her people. Dianne is going to be showing more money than anyone expected. She actually, for the first time in a long time, is going to be dipping into her own personal bank account. So at some point, Kevin is going to have to really take a hard look at this. Knowing him like I do, and his personality, I think he's going to look at that and probably still decide to run anyway. But then at that point, I think that he really becomes an unviable candidate for the U.S. Senate. And the longer he waits, the less likely he has an option to pivot into lieutenant governor or insurance commissioner, or treasurer, which are two of the offices that he was looking at to potentially pivot into. So as you saw, Tom Steyer decided not to run against Dianne Feinstein. My inside sources tell me and have shared with me some numbers, and the numbers show that Dianne Feinstein is virtually unbeatable. And so Mr. Steyer decided to take that $30 million that he was going to dedicate to running against her and instead throw it against President Trump. So if Steyer looked at the numbers and couldn't do it with 30, I don't know how Mr. DeLeon is going to do it with less than $1 million. So, sorry, I didn't have a lot left after those two great guys went before me, but I hope that was insightful.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, inside information is always useful, and we thank you for that report.
Okay.
And welcome you and your company, along with California advisors, to our team. So we'll move on now. And the next item is we have an action item that comes from Philip Crabb. He'll give us a report on this. It doesn't just come from Philip. It's a legislative concept for approval. And so, Philip, would you give your report on that?
Sure. Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. Currently, SCAQMD and other local air districts are required by state law to send out mass paper mailings to allow for public notice of public hearings, rulemaking processes, and other functions. However, these efforts are costly, outdated, and inefficient in reaching members of the public. For context, the district generally spends up to $100,000 per year on postage costs for public notice requirements. Thus, staff recommends approval of sponsorship of a legislative proposal that would modernize these outdated and costly public notice requirements to make them more efficient and cost-effective. Specifically, this bill would seek to change current burdensome and inefficient mass mailing requirements to allow for reasonable and modernized methods of public notice, including the use of electronic mail, social media, internet postings, and communications when possible and practicable. However, paper mail would still be utilized if notification by electronic methods is not feasible. Overall, this proposal would reduce costs and provide more efficient and effective methods of public notice that would allow for increased public awareness of clean air issues and increased public participation in the process of helping to achieve clean air and thereby protect public health. Staff recommends a sponsor in concept position on this bill to allow flexibility in Sacramento and within the state legislative process. And if approved, staff will of course keep the committee updated in terms of the bill language and legislative developments regarding this proposal.
And Madam Chair, could I add something?
Yes, please.
So, committee members, the Health and Safety Code imposes specific mailed notice requirements for public workshops and public hearings, but those only apply to the South Coast District. The statute that provides for notice for the other air pollution control districts for their public hearings does not require mailed notice. So we think this is consistent with what the legislature has done. In other areas, in fact, other districts don't even have public workshops, but we're happy to continue to have those. We think they're useful.
Okay, thank you for that. So at this point, this is a concept, a proposal in concept. No actual language has been developed yet. And our staff will be working on that proposed language. You're going to come back to us with the language at some point. So yes, and we have some questions from, I believe Dr. Parker would like to be addressed.
Yes. Madam Chair and Council, I thought the government code basically gave an exception. Obviously, I recognize we are handled by the health and safety, but I thought the government code says notwithstanding any other law that may exist in any other statute, that these postings themselves can be basically done through social media, internet posting, etc. Does that basically, with that kind of exception, include us, or is it exclusive of what we do because we are so unique?
Well, Dr. Parker, I have to look into that because I'm not familiar with that section, but as a general rule, the more specific code, which in this case would be the Health and Safety Code that applies specifically to us, would still be effective. But I would need to look at the specific language, and I will do that before we initiate any legislative proposals.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions about this proposal? Yes, Supervisor Rutherford.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Without disclosing too much of what we discussed in closed session last week, we had a discussion about possible legislation as well. Is there any relation between that and this idea? Can and should they be tied together?
My initial reaction is that what we discussed in closed session might be more controversial than this. The thought here was to take it as part of the annual generic update, either to the local government committee or the environment committee. But we can look into that between now and the next Ledge Committee meeting as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? Then I will look for a motion to on this matter.
Barbara?
Barbara.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Sorry.
Question.
Yes, Dr. Burke?
Can you give Dr. Parker and I a call after the meeting, because we can't remember what happened in closed session?
Absolutely.
What Supervisor Roberts is talking about.
I will do that.
Okay? Thank you.
Okay. Again, this is a concept for legislation, and I'm looking for a motion on this matter.
I'll move for approval.
Thank you, Supervisor Roth. Supervisor Rutherford has made the motion, and looking for a second.
Second, Buscaino.
Okay, and Councilman Buscaino seconds the motion. Move to do a roll call on this since we're at remote location, so I'll ask Jeanette Short to call the roll, please.
Okay. Dr. Burke?
Aye.
Councilmember Buscaino?
Aye.
Dr. Parker?
Aye.
Supervisor Rutherford?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Mitchell?
Aye.
This motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. I did get a notification earlier in the meeting that Supervisor Nelson would not be able to join us, so just wanted to let you know that while we expected him at the beginning, he's probably been called away on urgent business and was not able to join us. The other item on our agenda is a report from the Home Rule Advisory Group, and that's a written report, so we do not need to do more than acknowledge that. Do we need to receive and file it? No, we just acknowledge it. And is there any other business to come before the committee? None. Is there anyone who wants to make public comment here this morning on any item? Oh, we have a full audience here, but no one wants to comment. So, pardon, at the remote locations, is there anyone who wants to make a comment?
No one here.
Dr. Parker, is there someone there? Okay, I believe there's
No, none here.
no one has made a comment from any remote location. So with that, I will adjourn this meeting until our next meeting on February 9th. Thank you all.